The flight was quiet. Too quiet. No crying babies, no talkative seatmates, just the hum of engines and the ache in my chest. I clutched my brother's obituary the whole way, folded and unfolded it until the paper wore thin at the creases. When I finally stood at my son's doorstep, suitcase in one hand, the cold air bit at my skin. The porch light flickered. I knocked once, then again. The door swung open, and there she was, Leanne. Not a word, just her sharp eyes scanning me like a stranger at the wrong house. Before I could speak, her hand came down fast across my cheek. A flat, stinging slap. I reeled back a step, my suitcase thudding against the railing. "You don't belong here," she snapped, wiping her palm like I was something filthy. Behind her in the hallway stood Ezra. My son. His arms crossed face blank, leaning against the wall like this was all normal. He didn't move, didn't flinch. He just stood there while the woman he married struck his mother like a stray animal. "I came for your uncle's funeral." I managed my voice low, but steady. Leanne rolled her eyes. "You could have stayed gone. We were doing just fine without your drama." She stepped aside not to welcome me in, but to let the cold air rush past. Ezra still hadn't spoken. I picked up my suitcase. My face burned, but I kept my posture straight. I walked inside, brushing past her without a word. The house smelled different new paint synthetic candles, and not a single photo of my late husband or me on the walls. Just Leanne's curated world, clean, staged, and empty. I felt Ezra's eyes on my back. Still silent. I didn't look at him. I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I set my suitcase down and waited for what I wasn't sure. But I knew this, whatever this home had become, I was no longer welcome. And yet I was staying, at least until the funeral was done. The last time I stepped inside this house, my name was still on the mortgage and my photos lined the hallway. Now it looked like I'd never existed. Leanne didn't bother showing me around. She just motioned toward the stairs and said, "You'll be in the basement. We've turned your old room into a closet." I stood at the top of the staircase for a moment, unsure whether to laugh or cry. The room where I used to read bedtime stories, where I once bandaged Ezra's scraped knees, was now full of handbags and shoes. "I just need a place to sleep," I said softly, more to myself than to her. The basement was cold. Unfinished drywall, cement floor, one bare bulb. No bed, just an old futon with a blanket folded stiffly on top. The kind of space you'd use for storage, not for your mother. I sat on the edge of the futon suitcase beside me and let the silence settle. Upstairs, I could hear Leanne laughing. Ezra's footsteps passed once then again, but he never came down. At the funeral the next day, I sat alone in the third pew, while Leanne whispered something to a cousin that made them both smirk. Ezra stood up front beside the casket, but his eyes stayed fixed on the floor. He never looked for me. No one cried when they folded the flag. No one spoke my brother's name like they meant it. It felt more like a formality than a farewell. Back at the house that evening, Leanne offered me a glass of wine, then laughed before I could answer. "Oh, right. I forgot people like you prefer instant coffee and silence." I said nothing. I walked back down to the basement, shut the door behind me, and pulled the blanket tight around my shoulders. This house had grown colder than the frost outside, and I no longer recognized the people living in it. 7 years ago, I stood in this same doorway with a small suitcase. Only then it was leaving, not arriving. Leanne had smiled politely and said she and Ezra needed space. Her words were soft, but the meaning was sharp enough to cut. I remember looking at Ezra, waiting for him to contradict her, to tell me I was still wanted. He only shrugged eyes down, and I walked away without a scene. I moved in with my sister Yvonne, 3 states over. She was already fighting an illness that would eventually take her. Caring for her gave my days shape. There was medicine to measure groceries, to fetch small comforts, to create in the quiet hours. We built our own little world out of routines and whispered prayers. No one from my son's side called during those years. Birthdays passed holidays too. My number stayed the same, but silence grew like ivy over an abandoned house. 2 years ago, Yvonne died. The house became mine by default, but it never stopped feeling like hers. I stayed because leaving felt like losing her all over again. I stayed because no one had asked me to come back, and because sometimes it is easier to live among ghosts you chose than among the living who forgot you. I didn't return for Yvonne's death. There was no invitation, no expectation. But when the call came about my brother, my last living sibling, I knew I had to come. Not for Ezra, not for Leanne, but for the man who'd once held my hand at our father's grave and promised we'd always protect each other. Now here I am, sitting on a cold futon in a basement that smells of damp cement and old paint, holding a bruise on my cheek like a keepsake. The people upstairs laugh over dinner, while my brother's casket is still fresh in the ground. I reach for my phone and open the camera. This time I take a picture before the mark fades, already thinking of what must come next. By the third morning, the house no longer smelled like my family. The hallway where my husband's photos once hung now displayed Leanne's curated prints, staged vacations, and smiling selfies with Ezra. I paused at the blank space on the wall where his military portrait had always been. "Where are the pictures of your father?" I asked, my voice low but firm. Leanne emerged from the kitchen drying her hands on a towel. "They didn't match the new decor," she said breezily. "This is our home now. We don't need to keep relics." I stepped closer to the empty wall, feeling something twist in my chest. He built this house with his bare hands. Those aren't relics. They're memories. Her eyes flashed. "Don't start with me, Thalia." She moved fast, her hand snapping out again before I could move. Another slap harder than the first, catching me high on the cheekbone. The sound cracked through the hall like a branch breaking. I straightened, slowly, refusing to touch my face. I reached into my coat pocket, found my phone, and pressed record. "Say that again," I said quietly. Leanne smirked. "Once the funeral's over, you're out. I want you gone." I told Ezra I can't stand you here another day. From the corner of my eye, I saw Ezra, standing in the doorway. His jaw clenched, his eyes dark. For 1 second, I thought he might say something, anything. But he just turned and walked away without a word, leaving the sound of Leanne's voice echoing in my recording. The bruise throbbed, but inside, something shifted. The silence around me was no longer just absence. It was evidence. And evidence could be used. I walked back down to the basement, closed the door, and began making a list of everything I would need next. I took the bus into town that morning, bundled in my sister's old coat, the one with deep inside pockets. In one I kept my phone. In the other, folded with care, were copies of the mortgage agreement, my signature still there beside Ezra's. The ride was silent, but my mind wasn't. Marion Elridge's office sat above a florist shop tucked between a bakery and a barber shop. I hadn't seen her in years, not since my brother's 60th, when she brought him a bottle of wine and a stern warning about his cholesterol. She had always been the quiet one at family events, observant, deliberate, polite. I needed deliberate now. She didn't smile when she saw me, just nodded and gestured for me to sit. I handed her the papers without a word, then opened my phone and played the recordings. I showed her the photos, each bruise, each time-stamped moment. She said nothing for a long time. Then, "Do you still have your copy of the mortgage file?" "I do. And the original transfer documents, too." Marion took out a legal pad and began writing. "You still own 40% of that property," she said. "Your co-signature isn't just decorative. If they want you out, they'll have to buy you out or face court." I nodded. "And the assault." She glanced at the photo again, her face unreadable. That too. You can press charges. At minimum, file a report. There's enough here for a protective order and a formal financial claim. She paused, then looked up at me. You want to burn them down or take back what's yours? I want peace, I said. Marion gave a small nod, scribbled something else, then closed the file gently. Then we'll do this clean. No yelling. Just paperwork. Outside, the cold hit my face, but it felt different now, sharper, clearer. I gripped the folder in my hand as I boarded the return bus, replaying Leanne's voice in my head, word for word. The invitation came in the form of a command. Leanne stood at the top of the basement stairs, arms crossed, and called down. We're having guests tonight. You'll help serve. I looked up from my notebook where Marion's instructions were scribbled neatly. No, thank you, I said, folding the page shut. I'm not here to work. She scoffed. Then don't eat. Just stay out of sight. That evening, I stayed upstairs anyway. I had every right to be in that house even if they pretended otherwise. The dining table was set with white napkins folded like swan's candles flickering, and my crystal glasses bought with the co-signing bonus from my retirement fund shining under the chandelier I had once chosen with Ezra. The doorbell rang. Leanne welcomed her guests in a too-sweet voice, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood. She passed me in the hallway with a tight smile. Don't embarrass yourself tonight. I stayed near the wall, quiet, watching, listening. Ezra poured drinks, smiled like a stranger nodded when Leanne praised her home, her design choices. Then, as I reached to grab a napkin from the side table, Leanne turned and bumped into me. Her wine glass tilted just enough. Red wine splashed across my blouse and shoulder. I gasped and stepped back. Oh no, she said flatly. I'm so clumsy. Ezra didn't look, didn't blink. Leanne turned to her guests. She's just a helper now. We keep her around for company. I didn't wipe the stain. I didn't flinch. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and pressed record. Her voice was clear, her tone unmistakable. I let it run. I looked around the room, and all I could see were the pieces I'd helped build the light fixtures. I chose the dishes from my wedding registry, the loan I'd co-signed to secure this very roof. They thought they'd erased me, but everything in that room had my fingerprints on it. I slipped back into the basement before dessert was served and laid my stained blouse beside the envelope on the nightstand. The house was still asleep when I crept upstairs. Not even the heat had kicked on yet, and my breath curled in the morning air as I stepped into the kitchen. I placed the sealed envelope right in the center of the table, where Leanne usually displayed her centerpiece of fake hydrangeas. She'd moved the flowers to make room for wine bottles last night. Now the only thing on that polished surface was truth. Inside the envelope, a copy of the property deed with my name highlighted a letter of intent from Marion detailing my 40% ownership, a police report filed quietly the day before, with time-stamped photos of my bruises and the audio transcripts of everything Leanne had so helpfully provided. No yelling, no confrontation. Just paperwork, as promised. I stood for a moment and looked around. The air was still heavy with last night's laughter. The crystal glasses were still drying by the sink. I wondered if Leanne would read the letter before or after her morning coffee. Whether Ezra would pretend surprise or just keep doing what he did best, nothing. I didn't leave a note. I didn't slam the door. I picked up my small suitcase, slipped my coat over my shoulders, and walked out into the frost-covered street without looking back. At the inn, just 2 miles away, the woman behind the counter handed me a key and asked for no explanation. I paid for 3 nights in advance. That should be enough for the papers to land, for the silence in that kitchen to start ringing loud. I placed the phone and the envelope copies in the nightstand drawer beside the bed and sat down, still in my coat. The quiet here felt different, not dismissive but deliberate. I took out my notebook and crossed off the final item on my list. Deliver. Leave. Wait. Outside the window, the street was just starting to stir, and somewhere across town, I imagined a fork dropping mid-bite, a voice raised, and finally a silence neither of them could ignore. Leanne walked into the courtroom with her chin high and lips pursed, flanked by a lawyer too young to hide his nerves. She wore cream from head to toe and smirked when she saw me sitting quietly at the end of the bench, hands folded on my lap. She thought this would be easy. Ezra wasn't with her. The judge was a woman with sharp eyes and a calm voice. She didn't waste time. Marion spoke plainly, presenting the deed first. My name's still there in ink and full legal weight. Then the photos, every bruise time-stamped and printed on thick paper. Then the audio. The courtroom speakers crackled with Leanne's voice. Her laughter. She's just a helper now. The slap came next. The sound, the pause afterward. Then her clear statement. I want her gone. Leanne's attorney objected, stammered something about tone being misinterpreted. The judge shut him down with a look. Then came the wine-stained blouse, entered into evidence alongside the receipts from the loan. I co-signed the very money that bought those crystal glasses. Leanne flaunted so proudly. I didn't say much. Just answered. When asked. Clear, steady. I didn't cry. By the time it ended, the room was heavy with a silence no one could joke through. The judge leaned back in her chair and folded her hands. This court finds the respondent's behavior coercive and emotionally abusive, with documented instances of physical harm. We confirm the petitioner's partial legal ownership of the property. Effective immediately, a protective order of 6 months is granted. A full financial audit of the household's use of co-owned funds will be conducted over the next 90 days. Restitution will be discussed upon audit completion. Leanne didn't smirk then. She didn't even look at me. Marion leaned toward me, her voice low. We'll handle the rest. Go home wherever that is now. I nodded and stood. My feet felt lighter than they had in weeks. As I stepped out of the courthouse into the sun, I didn't feel victorious. I felt clean, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel erased. Ezra called 2 days after the hearing. I let it ring twice before answering. His voice was quiet, like he didn't know what he was supposed to say now that everything had landed. Can we talk? He asked. Please. I picked the cafe. The one with the chipped blue booths and coffee that always tasted a little burnt. He used to love their pancakes when he was 10. I used to sit across from him with my cup, watching him drown them in syrup like he had all the sweetness in the world ahead of him. He was already there when I arrived, hands wrapped around a mug, eyes hollowed out by something heavier than guilt. He stood when he saw me, but I didn't offer a hug. I'm sorry, he said before I even sat down. I didn't know how bad it was. I didn't know what to do. I stirred my coffee, watching the cream swirl. You didn't need to do anything heroic, Ezra. You just had to not help her hurt me. He winced. I didn't mean to become like her. That's the thing, I said, finally looking at him. You didn't become like her overnight. You watched her for years, and every time you looked away, you gave her permission. He blinked fast, his shoulders sinking. I thought if I stayed quiet, things would stay calm. They stayed convenient, I said. For you. He looked down. Do you hate me? I paused, letting the question settle between us like steam rising from the cup. No, I said. But I don't know if I trust you anymore. The silence that followed wasn't cruel. It was honest. I stood up, placed a few bills on the table and said, Take care of yourself. As I stepped out into the chill, I didn't cry. I didn't hope. I just walked, my coat pulled tight and my steps steady. I didn't need him to follow. I had already stopped looking back. The only thing left now was the home I would choose for myself. 3 weeks later, the moving truck pulled into a quiet driveway just across the street from the house I used to help pay for. The for sale sign had come down fast after the audit notice arrived in Leanne's mailbox. Some things move quickly when truth applies pressure. The cottage was small, 1-floor white shutters, a cracked front step, I planned to fix myself. It didn't have a grand entrance or designer furniture, but it had something else: peace. The kind that grows when you've walked through fire and come out holding the match. Each morning, I walked around the block, letting the rhythm of my steps steady what used to ache. The neighbors began to recognize me. A woman with silver curls and a basset hound waved from her porch one morning. "You look like you belong here," she said with a smile. I smiled back. Heart steady. I always did. They just forgot. From my new kitchen window, I could see the house across the street. Leanne hadn't come out much since the court orders. Ezra stood on the porch, once watching, as I planted daffodils beneath my mailbox. He didn't wave. I didn't offer anything. This was mine now. The deed sat framed on my hallway table, not because I needed the reminder, but because it was the first piece of paper that bore my name and no one else's. I hosted coffee for the woman with the dog and later the man who ran the local hardware store. We laughed about weather potholes and the smell of the rain. No one asked about bruises. No one asked why I was alone. I baked again simple things: banana bread, cornbread, cinnamon rolls on weekends. The scent filled the space like a quiet claim: I am here. I am whole. I am enough. I didn't need to reclaim the house across the street. I'd built something stronger, right where they could see it, and I never once had to knock.